Every day I spend my time drinking. That song in my head now.
Yeah, sorry about that. Okay, we're now live on Facebook.
Okay.
Okay, we're now live in the room. Professor Dave Jones, OBE. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Chief, how are you? ColletteThain MBE, thank you very much for joining us.
I'm good, thank you very much. How are you both, you gentlemen?
As Robert has pointed out, I'm wearing my appropriate tartan for the moment, so which was entirely deliberate, I would hasten to add.
Yeah, I won't tell you my mum was English, my dad was Irish. We'll just leave that one out, will we? Right.
A little bit late. I was just coming from clinic.
Oh, right. Okay. Right, Robert. Shall I just crack on? Can we do that?
Before I know you want to open up the questions, but actually, before we go to Dave, the first question of the day is we've had somebody already asking, "How's your foot?"
Oh, that is so sweet, Debbie. Thank you. This was the 3 stings I got sitting here. The wasp was under my foot doing this time last week. I had all my windows open. Obviously, a dying wasp was coming, the queen no less. And as I was talking, I was being stung to bits. And it's much, much better. Thank you. Robert's tip of putting vinegar on it actually did the trick. So thank you.
Right, Keith, over to you.
Okay, Dave, thank you again. As please express you, so we've had people ask us about these new vaccines, which we'll come to in a minute. Yeah. But also, we're hearing from people hospitals are empty, and in particular, there was a film of a hospital in the north of England that somebody sent me this morning, and completely empty. So people are getting a bit confused with messages that are coming down the line, and I wonder if you could maybe help with that. Please, people don't expect to see hospitals empty when we're being told by the experts that we've got a major COVID scenario going on. So maybe if you could just clear up a wee bit of data on that, and then if you would be so good as to talk us through any updates on the vaccine. I think, by the way, from here on in, David, every Thursday, I was saying this to the team today, I think we'll be doing a few minutes on the vaccine because I think there'll be rapid updates. I'm sure you'll agree.
Yes. Okay. So the current situation in the hospitals. So the first thing to say is that it is very different across different parts of the country. So in Newcastle here, we are relatively quiet. So we're a big hospital trust with 2 main sites and something like 2,000 beds. And a tiny minority of our beds have people with COVID in them. So we're well within our capacity. But I've just seen one of our fellows who's now working in North Tees, in a little bit further south, for those of you who don't know the nuances of Northeast geography. So North Tees is about 40 miles from here, and they are absolutely swamped with patients, double the number they had in the first wave. So it is very patchy. That's the first thing to say. And also, we know that the numbers of beds in hospitals also vary across the country. So how much spare capacity you've got over relatively short distances. What I would say about North Tees is they're not struggling enough to need us to help out. It's a National Health Service, so people do that. So that's also important, is that there is the ability to be able to help out. The second thing to say is that busyness around a hospital is covered by many different things, one of which is visitors. So if I go to my own hospital, it looks very quiet, but that's largely in afternoons when there aren't a lot of visitors around, and we've moved a lot of outpatient appointments to phone consultations, although we're doing a mixture here, so seeing people in the clinic as well as phone them up. And in fact, we're offering people the choice of how to do that, and I think we will continue to offer phone updates for people who would like to do that forever now, because there are people for whom perhaps the visits between blood visits and things are actually very conveniently done on the phone. So not everything will go back to the way it was before, because actually some of the changes in it are quite useful for people. So we are interested in finding out people's views. So obviously, if you don't have a lot of outpatients coming to and fro, it makes hospitals look quiet. That said, for most places, actually activity is no greater than it would be for normal at this time of year. And I think it's interesting, and and I'm speaking kind of as a interested observer of this and a clinician, I think there's a lot of disinformation out there. I think a lot of, I don't think personally think that Twitter is a great advent in the world. It becomes an echo chamber for lots of opinions. I think newspapers sell papers on the basis of lurid stories, and I think the reality sometimes is more boring than what people say. So a classic example would be the ITUs in such and such a city are 95% full, and that worries people. I can tell you this time of year ITUs are 95% full. The rest of the year ITUs are 95% full. And the reason is, in the UK, we operate a system whereby you expand capacity as you need to. So what happened with the first wave of COVID is that entirely planned, entirely routine, practice for, rehearsed, they expanded the capacity of ITUs. It wasn't an emergency. It wasn't something that people made up. It is done as an exercise all the time. And the reason for that is we don't know where there's going to be a plane crash or a major incident on a road or whatever. So all ITUs plan for having to rapidly expand. My wife is an ITU consultant. She's told me all about this. We have exciting conversations at home, as you can tell. But they rehearse this because what if there's a fire on an ITU? Okay, all of a sudden you have ITU patients, you need to move them to an ITU. So they have a whole system to escalate areas of the hospital into being an ITU. It's entirely normal. So what happened with the first COVID wave is that went into place. No panic, no emergency. It was routine. They activated it. So my wife's hospital operated at 300% its normal capacity. Okay, so, and they had no problem at all, and they're now back to 95% full. So 95% full doesn't worry me. 295% full does worry me, because you are reaching the end of that expansion capacity. So the reality is that there is no pressure on ITUs. They are busy, they're working hard, but there is no shortage of beds for people who need them. And we are a country mile, if I'm honest, from needing the Nightingale hospitals, a country mile.
Excellent.
And the sense that we get is that case numbers, certainly for us, are going down again now. The big challenge with COVID, and the reason why capacity is an issue, is that the average length of stay for people with COVID is quite long compared to normal hospitals. Normal people come into hospital, people go home. And particularly the need to have negative swabs before people go into care homes means that people stay around. And so what's happening is, we're getting a certain number of admissions per day, but what we're not seeing is big numbers of discharges that would then even it out. So the worry for capacity is projecting what's going to happen over time, because people are quite slow to go home, and slower this time around than they were before. So at the moment, and nobody quote me on this, it's looking to us much more like a sort of baddish flu season, with people who tend to be staying around in hospital quite a long time, rather than how it was. And I think, to be honest, it was a scary time in April and March and April. It was something that we hadn't seen before, but that was for about 2 weeks or so. And after that, it has looked like a worse version of what we see normally, rather than a different thing. So I think the reason why hospitals look quiet is a combination of things, but it's perhaps more in the appearance than it is in the reality. Hospitals are trying and working very hard to do elective surgery, still doing stuff through the private hospitals for NHS patients with NHS staff. But the system to us is working quite well at the moment. And I think the current, I don't want to get into the politics of lockdowns and things like that, but I think the sense is that the current one has been quite effective, and it has taken the edge off it. For what it's worth, if you look at where this current round of it all came from, it largely was university cities. And I think a lot of it was driven by large movements of people and students, and to be honest, students doing what students do, that rather drove it. And actually, some of the early changes that happened, and of course, the students are demographically a group of people who don't have the same problems as the older group did. It's quite materially different. And you look at the graph that shows the number of cases now compared to the number of cases in April, it looks like it's a much bigger problem. That's all a testing artifact. If you look, you will find it much more. It is, in fact, probably much, much less common in the population than it was in March and April. It's just that we're finding it more. That's
fantastic. That's actually very reassuring, David. Thank you.
Okay, vaccines.
Yeah.
So you will, so vaccines, so there have been two major public health advances in the last 150 years that have fundamentally changed risk in our population. Okay, and a lot of people think that it's antibiotics and things like that, and it actually isn't. The first is clean water provision, because avoiding waterborne disease, and the second is vaccination. And if you look across the totality of the population, the effect that they've had on the population are profound. Just for Robert, in Scotland, this is where you open a tap and you get water. I appreciate that, and electricity and things like that haven't got more to the body yet, but they are good. They really work well.
Cheeky.
Thank you. You look like you were amused by that, I have to say. Not. So clean water, the provision in the 19th century of sewerage, where you could get clean water not mixed in with wastewater, and then vaccination. And we all forget, I was vaccinated for smallpox. Colette will have been vaccinated for smallpox. Smallpox is a massive killer, and it is eradicated in the world through the actions of vaccination. So
diphtheria and polio.
I forget the impact. Look, in my world, the hepatology world, hepatitis B, people contracting hepatitis B at birth when they're born was a major public health emergency around the world, because people would then have lifelong hep B and liver cancer and things like that. And you look like places such as Hong Kong, it was an endemic thing, almost disappeared now because of the effects of vaccination. So when you hear some of the pros and cons of vaccination, it's important to remember the backstory, that this has saved literally millions of lives. Now, there will be people who abreact to vaccines. In the same way as, things happen rarely in lots of situations, but the balance sheet needs to be looked at. Of the vaccines, so a vaccine for COVID would be a major advance, but it's important to remember there are certain infections where vaccines have not been developed, even though, so I talk about hepatitis B, the safest vaccine you'll come across, the most effective vaccine you'll come across, and it's had a major effect. Hepatitis C has no vaccine. And the reason is because hepatitis C changes its appearance all the time. So the vaccine you have today is for the version that you had last year, but this year's version of the virus is different. So vaccine development is not easy. It's easy-ish to make something that has an effect, more difficult to have something that protects people from an infection. So what you might call a process marker, evidence it's worked, versus has it actually made a difference. So where we are at the moment is the problem with the vaccine trials is, of course, that they were done at a time when COVID was relatively uncommon. So although you look at the trials and you hear things like 95% effective, 90% effective, those are trials of many thousands of people where probably only 100 people got COVID in those studies. So actually, although the numbers are big and the effects look big, it's actually 90 people versus 20 people, which is not in a sense a big number difference. But clearly the vaccines work. The Pfizer vaccine is the first one, clearly works. The AstraZeneca vaccine with Oxford University, I think the first thing to say is that the trials are different. You can't take one trial and compare it with the other trial. In the same way with PBC, you can't take the trials of obeticholic acid and compare them with the trials of bezafibrate, because they're different trials in different people using different criteria and different success markers. So on the one hand, you can have a trial that shows this effect, a trial that shows that effect, so this one's got to be better. But it doesn't work like that, because you're not comparing like with like. To compare the AstraZeneca vaccine with the Pfizer vaccine, you have to do a trial with both of them in it compared to each other, and people haven't done those. And I think it's important to say that the AstraZeneca vaccine, the trial was tougher in terms of preventing infection. So it included looking for reduction in asymptomatic infection, not just symptomatic. So the bar was a little bit higher. It seems less effective, but the bar was a little bit higher. So I suspect what will come out in the wash is not much difference. And the answer is they all work in the short term, and they all do so without an adverse safety signal in the short term. So that's what we know. The issues about there are issues about cost, and there are issues about distribution of the different vaccine types, and I'll deal with those in turn. So cost is a relative, for us in the UK, a relatively minor issue, not least because of the cost of everything we're doing with COVID at the moment. So the cost of buying the Pfizer vaccine compared to the AstraZeneca vaccine is insignificant compared to the costs of managing COVID. So I think it's important to realize that. So it is, what is the most effective vaccine? The second one is around ease of using them, and that is a major difference. And you may have heard about the need to keep it at minus 80, the Pfizer vaccine, versus -4 degrees. And you think, what's the big deal? I can tell you it is an enormous deal, because a freezer at -80 is a ginormous thing that is incredibly costly to run, and you can't transport. A freezer at -4, you can put the back of your car and run it off the battery. So it's a really difficult thing. And if you want to transport, something at -4, which is a normal freezer, you get a thermos flask with some ice out your freezer, and you can put the vaccine in and transfer it at -4. If you want to do it at -80, you have to get dry ice, which is carbon dioxide at its freezing temperature, which requires enormous factories to make it. So it's a very big deal distributing it. And if you allow the temperature rise, it won't work. So getting the vaccine out, if you live in, the Scilly Islands, then it's going to be a huge exercise to get the Pfizer vaccine to you, and a relatively trivial exercise to get the AstraZeneca. And at the end of the day, even if the efficacy difference is true, one is 70%, one's 90%, I can tell you that a 90% effective vaccine you can't get is not effective, and a 70% effectiveness vaccine you can have is a much better bet. So leaving all of those things aside, what do I think about the different vaccines? The AstraZeneca one uses a tried and tested technique that's been basically the same approach that we've used for vaccines for a long time. We know much more about it, but it is a live virus that has been engineered to express the protein. The Pfizer vaccine is a brand new technology where you give the message to the body to produce the protein. Now, there's been a lot of worry about it being RNA, and is it going to go into our genes and change us all? Absolutely not. This is about the instructions to produce protein. So rather than giving a protein for the immune system to mount a response, you're giving the instructions to the body to make that protein. Okay, so there is a fundamental difference between them. The one thing I would definitely say is, if you are on steroids, or you're taking tacrolimus, or you've had a transplant or something like that, I would have the Pfizer vaccine, because it is not alive. It is entirely synthetic, whereas the AstraZeneca virus is alive. And obviously, if you give a live disabled virus, but your immune system is not so effective, then potentially it can multiply. That's probably the only caveat I would have. My best guess is that all of them will be passed and all of them will be made available, and it will come down to logistics, with a small number of situations where there will be a clinical imperative to use one or the other. then, and I think we will probably collectively have no choice in which one is offered to us, rightly or wrongly. I think that will be the case. Would I have the vaccine? Yes, without question. Would I suggest to my children they have the vaccine? Yes, without question. Will they work in older people? Yes, without question. And I think it's we need to remember the benefits of vaccination. And I think there is some silliness that is said about all of this. So I think vaccines are a major public health advance. These seem to be effective. They seem to be safe. Of course, no one can see into the future. But at the moment, as a society, we're going nowhere, and we have to break that cycle. So I think it's very important. Would I be concerned for PBC patients having the vaccine? Absolutely not. Other than post-transplant, think about which one you have, and guidance will emerge. And then the same logic would apply to people who are on immunosuppression treatments. Sometimes people worry about those people with cirrhosis and safety of things. For vaccines, it doesn't work that way. There is no toxicity. It's an immune effect. So people with cirrhosis will be able to have the vaccines absolutely fine. So that's where we are today. It's a fast-moving landscape. Watch this space. I think the only comment I would do is, if we had done a trial and given people half the dose by mistake, and then discovered that half the dose was more effective than a whole dose, we would have been laughed out of court by the regulators and told to do a trial properly. So that's what's called post hoc. That's what's called post hoc analysis. Okay, you have to define what you're going to do it, and then look at the results on that. What you can't do is move the goalposts in the middle of it all. So to say that's a little bit naughty is an understatement. But
well, I think you've made it a happy Thursday for everybody, David, because, you know, the second lockdowns and tears and Christmas and everything, people are concerned. I noted you didn't say you would give the vaccine to your wife. Do you want to amend that statement and add her on?
Long time ago, realised that telling my wife what she was going to have isn't a good thing to do. She's an intensive care consultant. She will have the vaccine in the very first tranche of people, and she's very happy too. But you have to understand that the fundamental power dynamics in the Jones household, or as she would call it, the Lynette household.
Thank you. Right, Robert, I'm sure you've got the questions teed up.
I sure have. So thank you very much for that introduction,
That's
Dave.
Fantastic. Well done.
That's most helpful. And again, the comments on Facebook are that you put a lot of people.
But watch this space as we did. So I was involved in the guidance for shielding in the first tranche. We'll be involved in the guidance about vaccines. At the moment, it's too early to say, but we will have a say in it. And obviously we'll consult widely on that. But that's in addition to all the other things I do, I'm actually an immunologist. So my science is the immune system. So I'm not entirely ignorant in this. I'm ignorant in many things, but not this.
Right. Go, Robert. Be quick. Get in.
So I do have a couple of other questions about kind of COVID and vaccines and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So you highlighted the accidental half dose.
Yes.
Does this have implications for the results? Are we looking at a false new dawn? Obviously, we hope the answer is no, but we both know regulators can be quite tight on this kind of thing. So, any thoughts?
Oh, good question. Really good question. Okay, so the first off, the bottom line is 62% effective in the correctly carried out trial, and the threshold that was predefined by regulators for passing a vaccine for COVID was 50% effectiveness. So the correctly administered AstraZeneca vaccine passes the bar for effectiveness, full stop. Okay. And remember I said is however seductive it is, do not compare it to the 95% for the Pfizer, because you are not comparing like with like. It's inevitable. The stock market's done it. People do it, but you are not comparing the same things. So even the correctly administered one is effective. So that's the first thing. The second thing to say is what on earth is going on? So the first thing is somebody is probably at this moment in time being taken out in AstraZeneca and shot for making a basic mistake. So it's embarrassing, full stop. Will regulators push back on it? In normal times, they would reject the data. Okay. And I've spent many quality hours dealing with regulators about the approval of obeticholic acid. And we work with companies and the regulators always on the new drugs that are coming through, as Colette and Robert have been involved with advising people to make sure there are no boo-boos. So the nightmare we all have is you have a highly effective drug you can't get approved because you didn't collect the right data. It's why trials, for those people, there'll be lots of people on the call who've been involved in trials. It's why you collect all this information in triplicate. It's why you have ECGs every time you walk into the hospital, because at the end of the day, that's what the regulators require, rightly or wrongly. And if we don't have the data, they may decline the drug. And as I say, the nightmare is you have a really effective treatment that you can't prove to their satisfaction in work. So you have to jump through the hoops. Under normal circumstances, it would kill that, because they would say you basically, this puts a question mark about the conduct of the trial. So they've been a little bit chutzpah, shall we say, in saying, look, we found an even better way of doing it entirely by chance. Isn't that lucky? I paraphrase, but that's essentially what they've done. Could it be a true effect, or is it just noise? Well, remember what I said. They'll tell you how many people are in the trial, 45,000. It's a big trial. But look at the actual case. Look at what's called the event number. So in a trial of COVID, really vaccine, really the only people who are informative are the people who've got COVID. In a sense, the people who don't get COVID, you can't tell whether they didn't get COVID because they had the vaccine, or they didn't get COVID because they wouldn't have got COVID anyway. You can't prove a negative. So the only informative people are the ones who went on and got it. And you compare the people in the trial arm, just the trial arm, those who took the vaccine versus those who didn't take the vaccine, and how many got COVID in those groups. And the numbers are actually very small. So is the difference between the half dose and the full dose and the 2 full doses a meaningful difference? I would say probably not, because the numbers are tiny, and it's what I would tend to call noise, if you like. Is there a theoretical reason why a lower dose might have worked more? So is there a plausible way this could be real? And the answer is there actually is, because one of the ways the immune system recognizes things to mount a response to or not is the amount of protein there is there. Okay, so if you have a liver transplant, then usually the immune system will cope with that very well, and it'll give up trying to get rid of the liver transplant, even though it's foreign to you. If you took a tiny bit of skin from the same donor and grafted it onto your skin, it will be gone in 48 hours because the immune system would pounce on it. So the immune system gives up sometimes with a very high level of a protein, and lower levels can be more irritant. Now, for a vaccine, you actually want the immune system to recognize it. So it is possible that the higher first dose, the immune system switched off in response because it was too high a dose, and at a lower dose, it didn't switch off. It's conceivable. Personally, I think it's unlikely, and I think it's probably an anomaly, and you should look at the 62% or whatever it is as the true effect. But if, like all scientists, I'm going to hedge my bets and say that there is a conceivable way it could be true. I could come up with an explanation for it, but it seems a bit too good to be true for me. So look at the full dose version.
Okay. Perfect.
Wow.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so next question. So another question about the COVID vaccine.
Yeah.
We're saying it's 2-dose vaccine.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, there are people, so again, this is hearsay, but again, you'll know more than I do here. I'm just literally the messenger on this occasion. There are people saying in the US, the people are getting symptoms from the first dose.
Yeah.
And so they're not actually going back for the second dose.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's less than ideal, but any thoughts on terms of the effect of that, or what could we advise, our patients who are listening in terms of the 2-dose procedure?
So the reason for it is, so if you, I mean, I'll give you an example now of hepatitis B. Okay, so it's normal to need multiple doses of vaccines to be effective. You remember this from being a child. I can't remember. I mean, that's a long time ago. But look at hepatitis B vaccination for clinicians. The first dose will give you a few weeks of protection. Okay. The second dose will give you up to a year of protection because it consolidates the way the immune system works. So it reminds the immune system it's seen it before. And that reminder helps the immune system convert it into memory. And then we give, in hepatitis B, a third dose, which gives you 5 to 10 years protection. So, and the reason is, seeing it again, the immune system is constructed when it sees something, it mounts a response. But if it sees something again, that's what infections do, and it's kind of programmed to remember it. So you are making it lay down memory. So it's a bit like playing a video game, isn't it? That if you play a video game and then you're not very good at it, you stop and play it again, you can play it much better because you're reinforcing memory. So and with side effects, you need to split them into two groups. There is the feeling rotten, okay, for an ache in your arm and feeling fluey for a day. That is just the immune system working, okay? So when the immune system works, it pumps out chemicals, and those chemicals are what make you feel under the weather and fluey. So the reason flu-like symptoms are not caused by the flu virus, they're caused by the immune system's response to flu. It pumps out chemicals, which are what make you feel fluey, and when you get the flu vaccine, you often get a dose of that effect. It's not an effect of the virus or the vaccine, it's an immune response working. So it's kind of what you get with an effective vaccine. That is not a side effect. That is just what vaccines do. And it's not a reason not to have the second vaccine, okay? The reasons to not have it are what you call a significant reaction. So you had, real problems, a rash over the body, or you had a real blood pressure drop, or, neurological problems or something like that. So those are the significant, meaningful side effects. A direct analogy is penicillin allergy, okay? So people will very commonly say that they have an allergy to penicillin. Normally, it's just they felt a bit sickly with the penicillin, or alternatively, it's just the thing that they were taking the penicillin for, making them feel under the weather. A true penicillin allergy makes you come out in red blotches in the skin, can affect your airway, can give you joint problems, okay? Now, that's very rare. If you do have that, you must never have penicillin again. But if you felt sickly with penicillin, then the chances are if you take penicillin again, it will never cause any problems. So yes, both the problems with the drug, but one is a sort of minor consequence of the situation, and one of them is a specific side effect. My advice is there is almost no point in having one dose of the vaccine because you will get protection for a short period of time. And so if you're going to do it, do it. And I would be cautious about ascribing too much to relatively insignificant side effects. So I think if you're going to do it, do it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Can I just say anything else? The very, very kind comments from Debbie about the book. It really is appreciated. I don't get many compliments in life, but thank you for that.
He does. We love him. That's very, very nice of Debbie.
And genuinely, so the stuff talking about why people get fatigued, that comes from many years of saying and explaining it in the clinic. And I think the ethos is that if people understand what's going on, then they can own it. This thing about owning the
deal with it better.
And so it's trying to explain it. And honestly, when we did the book, it's really difficult to balance between patronizing people, and I don't ever try and also making it too technical. And it is not an easy thing to do. I'm used to writing for a science audience, although it's a great learning curve writing things for the foundation and so on. And so writing for the bare facts is something we get. I love doing, and we get the fellows to do because it's really useful for them to get experience of it. But thank you for the kind words. Did try and set out to do that.
Excellent.
Right, thank you. One more question on COVID. So somebody who has PBC, I've got a feeling actually, no, I don't think they're post-transplant. I'll double check that. But they have PBC, they have COVID, they've been going for about 3 weeks. They are starting to get better, but they've been asked for a plasma donation. Will getting the plasma, will that have any impact or anything on their PBC?
Being a plasma donor?
Yeah.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. So there is no impact on them. And I think there is some emerging data that so what's called passive immunization. So the COVID vaccine or the hepatitis B vaccine or the hepatitis A vaccine are what's called active immunization. So you are not giving any antibodies, you are making the body produce its antibodies. But historically, for hepatitis A and B, before we ever had an active vaccine, you had what's called passive immunization, which is where you literally give somebody serum with antibodies against the virus from somebody who'd had the infection. And it's actually incredibly effective in the short term. And so that's what they're doing with the serum studies, is essentially where people are really sick and aren't going to have enough time to make their own immune response, you're giving them somebody else's immune response. So although it sounds, a bit science fiction and a bit new, it's actually tried and tested over a century or so. So to you as an individual, is there a risk to you? Absolutely not, at all. It won't do anything at all. You won't, your body will replace those antibodies very, very quickly. So you don't lose any benefit and it won't have any impact on the PBC. They may not want your plasma because you've got PBC, and people who've tried to be blood donors will know that they have a slightly irrational reaction to people having abnormal liver function tests. This is because they're concerned about viral hepatitis. We point out endlessly that a diagnosis of PBC, you are far safer than anybody coming in off the street to give a blood donation, because we know everything about your liver as part of your management of PBC, but there's a lack of logic about it. So don't be offended if they don't want your serum. There's nothing infectious about your serum. PBC is not an infectious disease, but they have a bit of a mental block about liver disease patients. See the name change, see alcohol misapprehension, see, all of the history that people have come up against. It's wrong. It's not, there's nothing for you to worry about, but they may say no. But I think it works, by the way, as a treatment.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to read out a question which frankly goes beyond me, but I've got drugs such as hydroxychloroquine.
Yep.
Because they're classed as one of the meds, does that mean it's better not to get a live vaccine? Or are they not related?
So hydroxychloroquine and whether to get a live vaccine.
Yeah.
Okay. So hydroxychloroquine is immunosuppressant. It's not. We don't use it at all. So we sometimes use immunosuppression in PBC, particularly if you've got overlap. It's not one we use, largely because I don't think it does any good at all in liver disease. I don't think it does any problems, but I don't think it does any good, and it has a few side effects. So it's often one that's used by the rheumatologist. So it's used in arthritis quite a lot. And we're asked all the time, is there any issue with hydroxychloroquine and PBC? And the answer is no. We just don't see it work very much for PBC. It is an immunosuppressant. It's a reasonably strong one. And so for that reason, given a free choice, I would have the Pfizer vaccine, not the AstraZeneca one, because as I said, it's entirely synthetic. It's not alive, and so therefore can't grow, whereas the AstraZeneca one can theoretically. So azathioprine, MMF, tacrolimus, steroids, etc., all of those. In an ideal world, I would have the Pfizer vaccine, but the caveat is we haven't been asked to give guidance on that, and we don't live in an ideal world. I think what will happen in practice is that lower risk people will get the AstraZeneca vaccine and people with enhanced risk will get the Pfizer vaccine, and I think that's probably a logical compromise. But hydroxychloroquine for COVID, I don't think is proved at all. Just going back to the antibody thing, look at what happened with Boris Johnson and Donald Trump. And I absolutely am not going to get into a debate about Donald Trump, but the clinical pattern of both of those, they have a similar risk profile, although Trump was higher risk because he's older, both overweight, both men, both a bit of a sedentary lifestyle. And yet Boris did really quite badly, and Trump did very well indeed. And it's an interesting one. It's an anecdote, but Trump got the experimental antibody treatment, okay, early in the disease course, whereas Boris didn't. So Boris sat in his study in Downing Street and got progressively worse, whereas Trump, they got on the front foot and gave active immunization, and he was out of hospital within 3 days. I just think it's an interesting observation.
Yeah, there is indeed.
Okay, so moving on from COVID, there's something called PBC, which you may or may not be aware of. So we'll try and ask a couple of questions on that if we can. So the first question, in terms of having a low neutrophil count, is it linked to PBC? Is there anything that a PBC patient should know?
So, right. So a low neutrophil count is not something typically associated with PBC. So it's not in our spectrum of things that we would look for or expect. So why do people get a low neutrophil count? Well, it can happen in liver disease of all causes if people have got cirrhosis, because the neutrophils all sit in the spleen, which is enlarged. So people can have a low platelet count, can have a low neutrophil count as part of cirrhosis and a big spleen. And it's, we actually measure platelet counts as a way of working out if people have got cirrhosis because of it. So the first question is it just the neutrophils or is it the platelets as well? If it's a pure low platelet count, then there are a lot of different reasons for it, including an autoimmune response to them. So we know there's a thing called autoimmune hemolytic anemia, which is where the immune system mounts a response to the red cells. So your red cells drop. So PBC is an autoimmune disease in the liver. You can get an autoimmune disease of the red cells. You can also get an autoimmune disease of the platelets, which is a thrombocytopenia purpura. And those are linked to autoimmune conditions. And you can get a rare version of that with the neutrophils. That's the first thing to say. So it could be a linked autoimmune condition. Here's an obscure fact for trivia lovers everywhere. The autoimmune hemolytic anemia was one of the only 3 diseases named by Thomas Addison, identified Thomas Addison. He was the man who identified PBC. So although he didn't know of any link, they are linked as an autoimmune disease. So there's a trivia question for everybody. Sometimes drugs can do it. So sometimes it can be a drug side effect. So if people have got low neutrophil count, then it's worth having a little look at the drugs and making sure something isn't driving it lower. And sometimes it can be a sign that there's a problem with the bone marrow. So it is worth checking it out. And I think you need to have an explanation for why it is. If it's been there for a length of time, it's much less of an issue, because whatever it is can't be a significant thing. But if it's a new onset low neutrophil count in a PBC patient, question 1 is it cirrhosis, question 2 is an immune thing, and question number 3 is if it's a drug. If not, then it's probably worth being looked at just to make sure there's nothing in the bone marrow to underpin it. But usually it's not significant.
Is this the same Addison that they thought was Jack the Ripper, or was that Gull?
No, Colette, I mean, you've not listened to the many times I've told this. So Thomas Addison, so PBC was described by Addison and Gull. Thomas Addison was one of the fathers of medicine, who then went on and described hemolytic anemia. William Gull was a medical student at the time. I point this out to all my medical students that they didn't become famous, so they've got a lot to live up to. But William Gull went on to be famous because he was Queen Victoria's surgeon. He described anorexia nervosa and thyrotoxicosis, which is also bizarrely linked to PBC, but he's also thought to be Jack the Ripper. Now, I don't advocate our students become Jack the Ripper. That wasn't the message, but go on and be influential in your career. I've got that all wrong, really, haven't I? But Thomas Addison and William Gull are truly fascinating, and it's one of the talks I do about PBC, the history of it all, because I think it's so there you go, the father of medicine and Jack the Ripper. I've got a lot to live up to.
Right, moving on.
He probably wasn't Jack the Ripper, by the way. It was a theory that he was a surgeon.
We'll never know. We'll never know.
So we've got a couple of serious PBC questions now, which I'll bring up. So the first one is that somebody who's only 2 years in their journey, so they've only been diagnosed 2 years, but they've not seen anyone for over a year now. So they're slightly concerned about, you know, what should they be doing? You know, the fact that they've not seen anyone for over a year, you know, what can they do to help themselves? What are the questions they should ask? What would you advise, please?
Okay, so PBC is a very slowly progressive condition. It does not change rapidly, really, in anybody. So whereas conditions like autoimmune hepatitis can deteriorate, you know, rapidly, PBC does not tend to do that. So that's the first thing to say, is that I always say this to people when you come to the clinic: it's not a condition that gives you surprises. So it's trends over time that matter, not if you go into the clinic, don't worry what the bloods are going to show this time. They are likely to show what they showed last time or a small change. So it's that trend over time. So that's the first thing to say. The second thing to say is how concerned you should be depends on what the baseline is. So there are two things that PBC can do over time. One is it can worsen, and the other is it can become symptomatic. So they're really only the two things that change over time. So the first question is, what are the alkaline phosphatase and bilirubin? If those are low, if those are, you know, controlled on URSO, then the chances of that ever changing are very low. So the fact that you've not been seen for a year, in a sense, is a very low risk thing. So if you've got an ALK phos which is well below 200 on therapy, then, you know, it's absolutely no cause for concern. People do not turn into URSO non-responders. They either respond or they don't respond. If the ALK phos is over 200 or you're not on URSO, then yes, there needs to be some tightening up for treatment. So it all depends on the background situation. If it's a low risk situation, low risk bloods, or, you know, on therapy with low risk bloods, then it's fine. And symptoms, you know, what you see is what you get. So itch obviously is controllable, and we always need to help people with that. So we always see people with itch as fast as we can, because treatment can be very effective very quickly. So if the itch is worse, you need to be seen and managed. Fatigue is much more difficult. It's more about coping and living with it, and at the moment self-help with it. So it's less, there's less directly that we can do at one particular visit. So how frequently you need to be seen depends entirely on what the problem set is. But if it's stable, then the risks of not being seen for a year are very low, because the chances of it changing are very low. And I think to be honest, I'll be absolutely honest, there has been a lot of transmission of COVID in hospitals, as there was in care homes. I think it's important to be honest about that. And I don't think, whatever people will tell you, that masks and visors and things eliminate that risk. I don't think they do. And so there comes a time in life where actually there's a risk and benefit. And actually, if you have bog standard, stable PBC with well-controlled bloods and no symptoms, then actually probably it's a reasonable thing to hold off. What we're worried about is that people are going to be dropped from the system for follow-up. So it's going to be very important to pick people up afterwards. But I think if it's low risk, low impact and well controlled, then I would just await events. And if any of that changes or is not true, then it's important to push for a follow-up visit.
Yeah, I think I was going to just endorse that, and to say to the person who's asked the question, if there's any change at all, then don't sit on it. You know, proact. You know, nobody will mind you picking up the phone and trying to contact them or find an email address. But if there are any changes, you know, make a move. That's really important.
No, that's absolutely key. Thanks, Chief. So I've got a big question coming up, so I'm going to do a couple of quick ones first. Then, first one's in the room. Somebody's had an endoscopy on Monday. First off, Abby, sorry to hear that. But the guy's question is it bruising? Is it something they should be worried about?
Right, simple. You need to get in touch with the endoscopy unit and tell them. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, Abby. Let us know how you are.
Yeah, you need to get in touch with the unit where they did it and tell them. Okay. It partly depends on what they did, whether it was just a routine diagnostic one or whether it was a difficult one. It could well be bruising, but sometimes you can cause some damage to the esophagus. So they may need to see you just to check everything's all right. So nothing to be worried about, but you can't tell. And sometimes you know, do you react to situations and do you not react to situations? It's all what the background is. And discomfort after an endoscopy 4 days ago needs somebody probably to have a little think about it. Look at the records of the endoscopy, and if in doubt, get an X-ray, to be honest.
Yeah, yeah.
And just to go back to the thing we said about hospitals and business as usual. Emergency medicine, sick people management, problems are being managed as they always have been, okay? We are operating a totally normal service, but adjusting how we deliver it according to what individual people want. There's nothing we're not doing, nothing that we're not offering, and that's true. So do not sit at home worried about something because of COVID. You absolutely need to have that checked out. But it's difficult to give specific advice without seeing the record from the endoscopy. But if you're worried about bothering them, they would want to know. Okay.
Abby's got good care down in Wales. She's got a great consultant. You know him very well.
Honestly,
she will look
he
after
would want to know. Okay.
Yeah.
He would want to know.
Yeah.
And don't sit on that one. It's the sort of thing where we always want to know, and so, and it's also, to be honest, not want to go via the GP, because you'll get down a rabbit hole, and ultimately they'll and ah and then say get in touch with them. But get in touch with the endoscopy unit and just ask them. And like all of this, one of the things that's, I always say, I've been having a discussion about this today, is that sometimes people worry about, in a sense, pointing out or be seen to criticize their clinicians. There are two things to say to that. The first is, do not suffer for being too polite. Honestly, we're all too polite, and get what you want and need, and shy burns getting out. And the other is, there is a really easy way to do it, which is to say you've been in touch with the PBC Foundation, and their advice is to do this, okay? And behind the scenes, there is a really slick system. So the guys know this inside out, and they have instant access to people like myself and James Neuberger and George Mells and so on and so forth. And they run things past us. And you don't have to name names. You don't have to say, I've been talking to the Dave Jones or something like that. You have been in touch with the PBC Foundation's internationally recognized expert patient group. I have been in touch with the PBC Foundation. They have suggested I get in touch, is all you need to say, because you have taken advice. And I think they've got a full network of medical advisors, and we all comment on these sorts of things, and it just depersonalizes it. You are not making any comment, but the PBC Foundation said I should get in touch. And it would be unwise of any clinician to ignore that, to be honest.
The fact that our clinician is one of our medical advisors is an even bigger bonus. But absolutely, but this is a great point you've made, David, for everybody. It's a great point.
It's just invoke the foundation, okay?
Yeah, information is always accessible via.
Exactly.
So I'm coming to you first, Dave, then I'll go to the chief. But in the meantime, now bear in mind that Facebook is a public forum, so any comments that you put down in there are open to the public to reading them. But the reason I say this is we've got somebody who is newly diagnosed. So first off, welcome. Thank you for joining us. I'm delighted you found us. So I'm going to ask the chief, who's been diagnosed for 26 years and had PBC for longer than that, to talk shortly after we ask Dave your question. But those of you in the Facebook room, if you just want to jot down just a number, if you're happy to do so, to let us know how long you've been diagnosed. Again, just to reinforce that PBC is a long-term condition, and just to go there, if you're happy to do that, then we'd be grateful. So the question is from somebody who's newly diagnosed. Are we born with PBC? Is it genetic and something just triggers it? What can you say for somebody on the offset of their PBC journey, please, Dave?
Just to comment about the duration first. I'm still looking after the very first patient I saw as a junior doctor in 1988 on a surgical ward, and she came in to have her gallbladder out. So I was the junior doctor, and being a smarty pants, I've always been the smarty pants, I diagnosed PBC. And all of these years later, she is under me, and we laugh and joke about all of those years, okay? And she has normal liver function tests and has no problems from her PBC, but we laugh and joke about it. 32 years, okay? So, so the first thing to say is that there is a component of predisposition to it, okay? And I'm very careful with my words about it, because there isn't a PBC gene. It's not like cystic fibrosis or hemochromatosis or hemophilia, where there is a gene that means you will get the disease. But our immune systems are built in a certain way, and that code to build it is something we inherit from our parents. So height is another example. So you can predict the height of children from the height of their parents. There isn't a height gene, but there is a mix of genes in people that dictate their height. And because you inherit that mixture of genes, you get an average of all of those things. It's like heart disease. There are families where heart disease is common. There isn't a heart disease gene. There are some very rare types, but most people, there isn't a gene. But heart disease will tend to run in families because there are accumulation of small effects which are just in the family. And the same is true of immunity. And although we can't see the immune system, so therefore it's not like height, you can't measure it. So what I always say to people in the clinic is it's why there are no Brontes anymore. So in the 19th century, with all the infectious diseases that were around, and we all know the Brontes, all bar one, died of TB, and it wasn't because people were exposed to TB or not exposed to it. In the 19th century, everyone was exposed to it. And some people could survive it and other people couldn't, and not being able to survive it would be a family thing because they had a problem with their immune system that they inherited from their parents. It. And there are no Brontes anymore because they died of TB. We're all here today because our immune systems allowed our ancestors to survive. It's as simple as that. What that does, however, is it rewards strong immunity. So if you look at the Black Death in the 14th century and TB and diphtheria and all of these things, we are the survivors. We're the offspring of the people who survived that going back generation. So there has been an enriching of strong responses to infection. And strong responses to infection can also become uncontrolled responses to infection. So it swings and roundabouts. So we are people who survived, the offspring of people who survived because their immune systems could fight infections. But that means we've got, by definition, strong immune responses, and strong immune responses with a loss of control predisposes to autoimmunity. So it is one of those things that the reason why you got PBC rather than the person next door is because of your parents fundamentally and the type of immune system that they gave you. However, you will benefit in other ways because, and here's an interesting thing, I will tell everybody that there has been no impact of COVID on PBC. What I can tell you off the record is that PBC patients appear to have much less in the way of COVID problems than the general population. Isn't that interesting? So there is certainly no increase. The reality is that there is a decrease probably. Is that because actually you've got a strong immune system and that's why you got PBC? But the swings and roundabouts is, you lose by having PBC, but you gain by having a strong immune response to be able to fight an infection. So it's a very balanced and nuanced thing. So your next door neighbor didn't get it because you had parents who had a certain type of immune system, but the quid pro quo is that you'll be better at fighting infections than your next door neighbor. That's the concept. Most people, however, in your family, so if you have lots of brothers and sisters, all of whom have the same mix, then the chances are they won't get PBC. So most people with the genes, that put them at risk because of that's how their immune system built, won't get the disease. And that's because you need something to come along and irritate the immune system to trigger it. So it is an unfortunate combination of coincidence. Partly you're born with, partly wrong place, wrong day, wrong thing. We don't know what it is. But most people with the genes won't get PBC because they won't encounter it. What that means in practice, because a lot of people who ask, why did I get PBC? In fact, they're asking, what's my daughter's risk of PBC? And I always actually answer their question, why did I get PBC? By saying what I just said to you, and then saying, but just in case you're wondering, what does this mean for family members? The answer is that the risk to family members of getting PBC is very low. So if you had a daughter, and that's the mother and daughter, statistically, because of the female thing, is the highest risk combination, your daughter has less than a 1 in 100 chance of ever getting PBC in her life. So the overall risk is very low. So it is a little bit genetic, but it's not a genetic disease. It's best thought of as a variant of normal. And that variant of normal in other situations is actually advantageous. So you wouldn't want to get rid of it, but it does explain why some people get it. But the quid pro quo, interestingly, is that PBC patients actually overall have a lower risk of cancer than the general population. Of course, you see people with PBC and cancer, of course, and you need to screen for it as you would do in other normal situations. But there is always a swings and roundabouts about it. The one thing I always say to people is, absolutely, there is nothing you could have done to have prevented this. Sometimes people think, oh, if only I hadn't been in this shop on this day. No, there's nothing you could have done to prevent it. You can't change your parents, and you can't avoid something where you don't know what that something is. So again, the final thing I always say to people in life is that in life we have to play the hand we're dealt, and PBC is just a hand that you're dealt. There's no point looking back and saying what if, but, you know, if only. What you do is grasp it and deal with it, own the solution to it by owning the problem to it. I hope that's helpful.
No, that is.
Just in the interest of time, I would say to this person, I have had PBC for 26 years diagnosed, and I had the symptoms many years before then. If you contact the office, they will give you my mobile phone number. I'm on webinars up until 6 o'clock today, but I'm more than happy to speak this evening. I'm dotting around tomorrow, over the weekend. Happy to talk you through it and answer all your questions. And if I'm not around, leave your phone number and I'll phone you right back and I'll answer. There's a lot to know, and we'll help you learn to live with PBC.
And I think, honestly, the shared experience thing is so important. I think that's why the profound value of the foundation, I think the biggest value people that I took to get from this is that they sometimes think they're the only one with these things, the only one with these problems. It's particularly around fatigue and coping with it. And actually, just to realize there are plenty of people like you who have got their own ways of coping and dealing with it is a fantastically useful thing. Mm-hmm. And so it's the networking. And I think I will pay enormous credit to the foundation. I think the work they've done in general is fantastic, but around COVID and that danger of isolation, that the hard work they've done, and we've played our part, but the online networking activities have been really fantastic. And actually, again, there are some things with all of this that I think we'll want to carry on doing, because I think they're just so useful. But part of it is realizing that there are other people with the same things who can help you with it. And a problem shared is a problem halved.
Absolutely. I mean, we had a team meeting today, a 2-hour team meeting, all of us on Click Meeting, and that's exactly what we were planning, Dave, was just where we're going for the next 3 and 6 months, and what plans we have, how we're going to work online, and try and include those that don't have iPads and iPhones and various things. But thank you.
I think face meetings are always valuable, but it's a mixture, isn't it? It's a complementary thing.
Yeah.
And I have to say, and I'll say it, I'll always say it, I enjoy the question and answer sessions enormously, and they have just been incredibly useful. I don't think we'll ever go back to not having online Q&A sessions. I mean, why would we? It seems to be so appreciated.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for your support. I'm aware that we've gone past 3. Shock, stun, horror. Are you?
I've got a webinar at 2:30.
Right. Okay. So we'll try and go as quick as we can then.
Robert, you haven't moved into quick fire answers yet.
So okay, very quick fire answers then. We've got somebody who, as well as PBC, they're a bit greedy. They've got another couple of autoimmune conditions, which we know is a common thing. But they've got Raynaud's and scleroderma. They're not always practical to be wearing mitts and that kind of thing, but they're starting to lose finger function. Yeah. How can we help?
Okay, so it's common association. A common association. It's associated with a condition called systemic sclerosis. People often read about that and worry about it. What we actually find with PBC is that it tends to often just be Raynaud's, actually. So it's like a lot of these autoimmune associations, that the associated condition seems to be a little bit milder in terms of the ways it can affect people. So systemic sclerosis can have kidney problems and lung problems and like that. We don't tend to see those. We do see a lot of Raynaud's. So 2 things. One is prevention is better than cure. So a bit like taking an asthma inhaler before you take exercise. Don't wait to get short of breath. So gloving up, hand warmers and things before it gets too cold is a good thing to do. The agent we use all the time is nifedipine, which dilates the blood vessels. And again, it's using it in a way that works quickly. So a little tip we do is that the simplest form of nifedipine, it's a drug that opens up blood vessels. It's an angina treatment. But normally it's given as a slow release. The slow release one doesn't work really well in Raynaud's. The ordinary one is capsules. Bite the capsules, put the medicine under your tongue, and it works very well. So you can sometimes play around with all of that. And then the other thing to say is that there are now very effective, what I would call big gun treatments. So things like prostacyclin, givers and infusions. So if you're not under a rheumatologist, so what we would do is advising about the hands, hand care, mitts, not getting stuff out of the freezer, that sort of thing, and prevention being better than cure. If you've not got, if we would do that, we would do the nifedipine thing, but at that point we would then refer on to specialists, because it's a super specialized world, because you need the big gun therapy. So if you're getting skin injury, so if it's painful, that's one thing, but if you're getting skin damage, it needs probably bigger gun therapies. And so if you're not seeing a rheumatologist, then you need to go discuss with the doctor about it. And to be honest, it's one of those things where it probably needs real specialist input. So, again, it's a bit like PBC. So there are lots of people who will look after PBC patients, gastroenterologists. And if you've got normal LFTs on URSO and no symptoms, that's fine. But a clinic like ours, we see lots of people with really complicated things, because that's what we do. And usually it's very reassuring to people to go to a more specialized setting. So one of the things that's very important in your care is to get the right sort of input for the types of problems you've got. And I have particular colleagues in my organizations who are specialists in this. And I realize that they know as much about this as I know about PBC. Yeah. And so therefore it's rude of me not to access. And you'll know a true specialist when they won't shut up rabbiting about the problem, because it's what they do. So you need to probably get some more specific input. But things like prostacyclin, and there are new drugs coming along as there are in PBC all the time. So it's one for a more specialist clinic, I would say.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay, thank you. Very quick fire. Husband has COVID. The wife who's with us doesn't. She's wondering if the fact that she was prescribed vitamin D could have had an impact, stop her catching it.
Oh, good question. My wife
is. This was on the radio today, David.
Vanessa is as I say, a critical care consultant, and is convinced that vitamin D is effective. And I think there is data. Everyone in our population is vitamin D deficient. Okay, almost that we've stopped measuring it because everybody is, and that's not PBC patients. That's everybody, and it's to do with working indoors, putting sunblock on, living in Scotland, those sorts of things. So everybody probably could benefit from vitamin D. And I'll tell you now, I've taken vitamin D from the very beginning of the COVID outbreak, okay, right from the beginning. So the answer is possible. Certainly continue with it. But we do know is that well over 50% of the people who've lived with people who've got COVID have not got COVID. So although we talk about it being easy to catch, actually it's easy to not catch as well. So common sense, don't, keep a distance, keep taking the vitamin D, and I think you'll be fine. But and you could be, if you've lived together for a couple of weeks, if you're going to get it, you'd have got it.
Yeah, this was on the radio this morning, and it was a doctor was saying exactly that. There is this 50% of people who just don't. They have the T cells, immunity, whatever. Vitamin D is good. Yeah, right. Okay.
Right. Dave, we have a huge amount of data now in terms of URSO and life expectancy. Do we have anything with OCA? What do we know?
Oh, good question. Not yet. Not yet, and it will take a long time to get it, because obviously, in a sense, we've got 20 years worth of use of URSO, so that you can look at people who've taken it for very long periods of time. So with OCA, what we've got at the moment is about 6 years worth of data. So the longest, 6 to 7 years is the longest anybody's been on it. What we do know is that it has an effect very quickly, and it that effect is then sustained for as long as you look at it. So the people treated for 6-7 years, they get all the effect they're going to get within 6 months, and after that it never changes. It gets a little bit better slowly, but it doesn't wear off. But we don't know what the long-term benefit is. We have, and I know there'll be lots of people on the call who are in UK PBC, and thank you, it's ongoing. You haven't seen anything yet, so some of the data coming out from that is startling. And what we have at the moment is some data on how active your immune system is, split according to whether you respond to URSA or whether you don't, and which response criteria and what impact having normal LFTs has. And I think it's very striking that absolutely without question, the lower your ALK phos is, the better. And I think before too long, the goal for therapy will be normal ALK phos. So I think we've probably been under ambitious with treatment in the past, and that's probably why URSO hasn't got such a dramatic effect on survival. And I think the prediction is that drugs that are more likely to normalize your bloods, OCA, bezafibrate, compared to URSO, will have a more profound effect. But increasingly, we will be looking to target normal LFT. So I think there's a mantra. I'm working on a new mantra. I like my mantras, but it's only normal is normal.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. And I believe so. Okay, now big one here. AMA negative.
Yep.
Symptomatic, abnormal liver biochemistry. The doctor is kind of looking at PBC, looking at PSC. The patient doesn't know what to do. Any advice or any thoughts or comments that you could throw in at this juncture, please?
Sorry, I just missed that. Had a biopsy or not?
Oh, that's a good question. I can't remember.
Has this come from America, Robert?
No, it's come from the UK.
Okay.
So 10% of PBC patients are AMA negative. Okay.
There's a no on the screen. Sorry, David, to interrupt. There's a no.
Okay.
Okay.
So 10% of PBC is AMA negative. Okay. So I've seen somebody this morning who has classic PBC in every way apart from being AMA negative. Okay. So it does exist. First thing to say is that some of those people have anti-nuclear antibodies, and so particular types of anti-nuclear antibodies. And in that situation, those anti-nuclear antibodies are as diagnostic as AMA. So, but it is important, they're not quite the same anti-nuclear antibodies as you get in autoimmune hepatitis. So it's a bit nuanced. But so the first thing to say is AMA negative, if they're ANA positive, is the same as being AMA positive. And you don't need to pursue it any further. Okay. Without a biopsy and without autoantibodies, all you have in a sense is liver function test abnormality. So it's quite difficult to diagnose conditions in those situations because you do need 2 out of the 3. Certainly you want to play the percentages. So I think if you have somebody who has a raised alkaline phosphatase and PBC-like symptoms, AMA negative, I think the first thing to do is to get as much information as you possibly can before you go to doing a biopsy. So
oh, he's frozen.
I've lost Dave. Yep, you've lost Dave as well. Okay.
Yeah, I know he's frozen. What Dave might do is go back out and come back in again.
Yeah, he's usually pretty good at that.
Yeah.
So okay, we got a first half of the answer. Yeah, he's gone.
He'll come back in again. Yeah, I'll need to make a bit of a deadline here, Robert, for me.
Yeah. So yeah, okie doke. Okay, I'll let you say your final words, and Dave and I will close up then. If you're okay.
Oh no, I didn't mean now. I meant no. At 3:30, I've got another webinar. Just
So maybe can you? So I don't mean.
Oh, here we are. There we are, David.
There we go.
Isn't it always the way you give a genius answer and then realise that nobody was listening? So I will compliment. Right. So the first thing you do is play the percentages. Okay. So the commonest cause of a raised alkaline phosphatase in a woman over the age of 40 is PBC. Okay. So that's an important thing to say. So it's on an index of suspicion. Another test that's quite useful is a thing called the IgM, so immunoglobulin M. So that's a measure of the antibody levels. It's not the autoantibody, it's just total levels. And IgM is usually elevated in PBC, and it's the only condition in which it's elevated. So that's a useful clue, and we do it in those situations. It adds a little bit of extra information. In terms of PSC versus PBC, it can be very tricky, and you should always think about the possibility of PSC in somebody who's AMA negative and who looks like they've got a PBC-ish type of condition. Commoner in men than in women, so gender plays a little bit of a role with that. An interesting question is any bowel symptoms, because colitis goes along with that. So that's all playing the percentages. And if in doubt at all about PSC, then we would organise a test called MRCP, which is a magnetic resonance. It's a type of scanning that is very good at looking for PSC. So what I would do is I would collect all that surrogate information about, gender, colon, IgM and things like that. And if I'm left with a raised alkaline phosphatase and nothing else, I would do at that point an MRCP, because that's a non-invasive test. And if at the end of all of that I still didn't have an answer, I'd probably consider a liver biopsy, because it's one of those situations where you need to know. Ultimately, if it's PSC, you're going to go on to URSO. If it's PBC, you're going to go on to URSO. So the answer in the short term is URSO, okay? So that's quite important. It doesn't actually change the medicines that you give. The reason why you've got to know if it's PSC, not PBC, is that PSC unfortunately has a risk of cancer with it that PBC does not have. So there is a risk of bile duct cancer, there's a risk of colon cancer. And we put people onto a screening program with PSC that if you've got PBC, you don't need. So that's the reason to know. If you genuinely can't decipher the two, we would screen people because it's safer to do that. So if you overscreen somebody who's low risk, that's a safer thing to do than to underscreen somebody who's high risk. So circumstantial evidence first, MRCP second, biopsy if in doubt, and then URSO regardless. And I would start the URSO right off.
Okay, brilliant. That's so helpful.
That's 3 in a week we've heard of this, Dave. 3 of these similar, and they're not so common. Okay, sorry. We'll keep going, Robert.
Oh, that's us. I just want to say hand over to you now.
Wow.
Thank you.
Well, David, that was fantastic. Thank you. It was really very helpful on the COVID thing as well, because that's going to be more and more of a topic with the vaccine. There's things going on. Robert, as always, fantastic the way you juggle all this. I don't know how you do it. You're a bit dark today. You're a bit dark. It's not got much light in there. Anyway, everybody, I hope we answered your questions. I know there's quite a few of you were coming in today. You particularly wanted to speak or ask questions of Professor Jones, and he's great. He always gives them in full detail. David, thank you.
And I presume we'll be doing one in December, Robert.
We are indeed. So we I don't know off the top of my head, but Miriam's got your dates in, so absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're aiming to do. I'm doing one a month from now on, and James Neuberger is doing them. And I would really suggest that you catch as many different people doing this as you can, because different experience, different perceptions, different flavors to it all. So I think it is valuable getting different perspectives.
Well, that's right. So next week we've got Dr. George Mells from Cambridge, from Madden Roots in Cambridge, and you've worked with George for many years now, as we have. He's fantastic. So we're going to be contacting you for January, February, and March. Anyway, that was part of our group chat today. So we're contacting Miriam, and she'll sort that out with you.
Update, obviously, any updates regarding COVID vaccination, etc. Important information we'll disseminate through the foundation anyway, and we will give a running update of where we are. You know, as much, and part of this is my perspective, and part of it comes from the official kind of channel.
And we can get it up on our website pretty quickly. We've just finished a Bare Facts. David has put an article on the Bare Facts, and he made it very clear it was dated at that time. And it's many of you have got it online, and it's actually gone to print for those of you who get it in the post. So I'm going to say to everybody, if you can, please go to our site and donate, because you know these things cost money and they're expensive, and we're very happy to do them. But if you're able to, we'd appreciate it. In the meantime, will we see you before Christmas, Dave? No, he's gone again. Sorry,
I've got the 17th in my head.
All right, okay. Okay, well, we'll see you before Christmas then. So
am I back?
Yeah, Robert thinks you are.
So Carol says Christmas jumpers for December. I heartily agree with that.
Okay. Or reindeer ears or something. Dave, thank you very much. Robert, thanks so much, both of you. And we'll see you soon. Any updates, just let us know and we'll get them out.
Okay.
Bye. Bye, everybody.
Bye.